Today, I saw a post in relation to someone who had a vaccine injury or perceived vaccine injury. It doesn't actually matter because if a patient believes that something is wrong, we have a responsibility to acknowledge it. And so it called to mind this question about the responsibility clinically within the health service, certainly in the UK, what we call the duty of candor. And this is the Medical Law Review. This was a publication from the March 2022, and it's talking about the duty of candor in healthcare, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It was published by Oliver Quick. And the reason why this had caught my attention was because of a post on LinkedIn. And this post caught my attention because of not just what the person said, but the comments that came in about what the person said. And in this situation, they highlighted, and this is a Kyla, thank you, COVID vaccine, for keeping me in hospital off and on for the past 8 weeks. The government I love and love to serve mandated a vaccine that is destroying my life. This is clearly a USA veteran. Never again will I take another vaccine. Multiple physicians have recognized me as a vaccine injury. I wish I had never received the Kool-Aid. Can't believe I drank it. Look what trust got me. And she mentions the name of someone that you can read. This clearly is one of those situations that we never want to happen in healthcare. But the truth is that it happens all the time. And this is part of the reason why they brought this duty of candor, because they recognize that responsibility within not just clinicians, but the whole healthcare system to be able to acknowledge harms. And this is largely because it's not only is it ethical, but they realize that so many people were angry just because there was no acknowledgement of what went wrong, that it caused lawsuits. And one of the ways to manage that is to be open and honest. And you can see here from the abstract, it argues that making candor, all right, the duty of candor to be truthful, a statutory requirement appropriately reflecting the ethical imperative of telling the truth about harm. And it is a powerful signal for honesty. And this is what we face from a clinical point of view. If something goes wrong and we are aware of something that has gone wrong, that someone has been harmed, from the perspective of duty of candor, we have a responsibility to tell the patient or the patient's families about it. It doesn't seem that this is applicable in terms of the scientific community or even the pharma industry, because lots of harms have been done over the years for which you rarely even get any acknowledgement, much less the openness and honesty that is requested and expected of the clinical community. And here you have as well, as they pointed out in this paper, they highlighted that its negligence cases in terms of maternity was almost 2.1 billion, which exceeded the 1.9 billion for delivering babies. And so, as they pointed out, behind the statistics are patients, their families, and clinicians who all suffer, sometimes in silence, after being affected by such harm. So, for patients and their families, a lack of openness in the aftermath of an adverse event adds emotional insult to their physical injuries, often having a long lasting impact. And this is very important, especially with what we have seen in the COVID pandemic. I don't know why people can't acknowledge this very simple but important point. The risk across the population for severe COVID 19 was not equivalent. What it means is that some people were at extremely high risk and other people were at very low risk. By using mandates, what you then do is you are effectively putting across to the population that that risk is about the same. That is clearly not scientific. And my big concern has always been for people who were low risk. We knew men were more likely to be affected than women. We knew people who had obesity were more likely to have severe disease. We knew hypertension, diabetes, comorbidities. And so if you had a 70-year-old male who was overweight with diabetes, hypertension, and kidney disease, their risk would be nowhere comparable to a 22-year-old female who had a normal weight and no comorbidities. The big risk is that by applying mandates broadly across the whole population, you can then have someone who had exceptionally low risk for severe disease becoming harmed by a vaccine. The principle I have been taught by a vaccine advocate or someone who had worked in the industry, they highlight there's a very important difference between a vaccine and a therapy, like a tablet. You're giving treatment to people who are sick when you're giving them a tablet or a treatment. Conversely, for someone who you're giving a vaccine, you are giving them an intervention before they have exposure to an illness, and potentially they may never have exposure to an illness. And what that means is that the responsibility for safety has to be much higher with a vaccine than with a treatment. That's how it has always been. And anything that changes that perspective is likely to damage what has happened in terms of vaccine perception. When I looked at the comments, and I encouraged all clinicians, all scientific community to look at some of the comments that were coming through, how horrible that vaccine was. From the beginning, I warned against it. Many have died. I have lost many loved ones. Now, whether or not someone in the scientific community is going to go on a high horse and say, oh, they got that wrong, the science shows everything was fine. I'm sorry. This person is going to tell every single person they know exactly this. You need to be aware of it. There are lots of people here. So sad that pharmaceutical companies can cause so much destruction without assuming any responsibility for it. This person had two uncurable illnesses that were a result of side effects of pharmaceuticals. You can see the responses here. So sorry to hear about the adverse reactions. It could have been me had my son not advised me not to take it in a very persisting way. All of these people have negative connotations with regards to the vaccine. Now, my warning is this: whatever you do, do not discount people's concerns. Do not discount what they are feeling and what they are thinking. And that's part of what is the openness and the honesty in terms of discussing what is going on. Here we have the value of honesty in healthcare. Openness and honesty are central to trust in clinicians and health systems. Patients value professional openness and honesty in relation to discussing diagnosis, prognosis, and the risks and benefits of different treatment options available to them, which of course is a legal requirement. Where is the responsibility for those people who have suffered a vaccine injury? That's a very important point. Is it the clinicians who are seeing the patients but haven't been told by the central authorities that this was a major thing? So maybe they could say something about myocarditis. Is there anything they could say anything else about? People have made reference to cancer spreading, lots of people having cancer, but the medical fraternity hasn't yet been told that this is potentially connected. So therefore, when people are talking about these things, they are not sure if they can be open, honest, or say there is no evidence of, but it doesn't mean this is not the issue. As I've been studying what happened in the history with regards to thalidomide. It's a fascinating thing I'm going to talk about at some point in the future. Part of the problem was that the time frame from when pregnant women in the first trimester took the tablet to when they had the deformities was easily about 6 months, 6 to 7 months. And therefore, there wasn't any clear connection with regards to the two. This is a similar thing if injuries don't happen almost immediately. That's part of the problem, is that if there are delayed responses, the question is, was it just the person getting sick, or could it have been, in fact, what they thought, potentially related to, say, the vaccine? And that openness and honesty to be able to acknowledge someone's illness, to say, well, actually, that may be something else. You know, you've got a family history of diabetes, and that may be why you've got diabetes, not necessarily because of the vaccine. But at the same time, if you had someone with no comorbidities, no other health issues, within about 3 to 4 weeks, they suddenly develop health issues, to discount that, in my view, is not being open and honest. So when we think about here, so we've got here, candor is conceived as requiring full frankness about not only the nature of healthcare harm, but also the explanations for it, which may require further investigation and take time to understand. One of the big mistakes has been in the pandemic is that even in relation to, say, myocarditis, what really is the mechanism? Why would this particular vaccine be so closely associated with myocarditis? You observe it is happening. We can see clearly the evidence it is happening. But what's the mechanism? When we looked at what happened in many women in terms of change with their periods post vaccination, it had been recorded on multiple occasions by researchers, and nobody quite knows the mechanism. Is it just coincidental? What could it be? So there is a responsibility not only to acknowledge if someone has been harmed, but to push to make sure that the investigations that are appropriate and investigations are done in order to find an answer. That's an important part of the honesty and the openness. More significantly, the statutory duty of candor also imposes a public duty on the health service to fully respect openness and transparency when delivering treatment and services. Many people are blaming their doctors specifically, and it's not quite fair because their doctors are following the system. And if the system is not acknowledging a specific harm, what is it that the doctor can do? Unless they have been independently researching it, like I have been independently researching it, so I understand some of the implications around autoimmunity. But if they haven't been doing that, they have to be dependent on the system to be open and honest. And if that system is not open and honest, it then impairs that ability for clinicians to then be open and honest to their patients. These are very, very difficult issues, and it is causing huge damage to trust across the whole population. When we look more at this one, this person says the coercion was so strong and persistent, it was most focused on junior leaders like yourself. They were lied to by leaders who we are supposed to confidently place our trust in. The crucible you are now enduring is not on you, it is on them. I pray for your recovery. These are pretty serious things. And these are lots and lots of comments here that there are hundreds of comments about people who are talking about their own experiences of their families and friends, and this is registered across the population. There is a desperate responsibility for the clinical community to be aware. Even if they disagree with it, they have to be aware as to what the public is thinking and figuring out how do we bring that duty of candor? Do you tell them that they're concerned about is all in their head and it's not real? Or do you tell them that this could be this case and you will endeavor to investigate and find out why this may have happened to them? As a final point, while mistakes and complications are inevitable features of delivering healthcare, there is no justification for preventing patients and their families from understanding the whole truth about harm that has happened to them. My final point on this is that for me, the central piece of the puzzle that needs to be acknowledged is autoimmune responses, where the spike protein binds to normal proteins and triggers the immune system to attack itself. This, from my research, and based on much of the research that is out there looking at autoantibodies after severe COVID, strongly indicates that autoimmune mechanisms are the central mechanism in cytokine storms. If that is the case, there needs to be a duty of candor to the public to say, well, is it possible that similar autoimmune responses can occur from spike protein from any source? If that simple scientific question refuses to be answered and clarified completely, and looking to explain why autoimmune diseases are increasing, that does not represent the duty of candor, because it indicates a failure to try and thoroughly investigate all the harms and potential harms that people may have been suffering. We are at a very difficult time in terms of medical and scientific work. Some people don't like me speaking about these things because it's kind of like washing your dirty laundry in public. I understand completely about what people may be thinking, certainly within the scientific and medical community. But I will tell you openly, if you don't approach this the way that I'm suggesting, with openness, with honesty, with a determination to find answers, there will be a continued disintegration of trust in science and medicine across the world. Trust in doctors fell 30% between 2020 and 2024. Some may criticize me for speaking about this, but in reality, I am doing my best to protect you and the profession that I love in serving people. Let us hope we have a better tomorrow. Thank you.